panel 3B of 2021 of the 2021 edition of CESAS, titled Africa and the COVID-19 Pandemic, Bale or Bane. So this is an interdisciplinary panel of literary critics, poets, and scholars of administration or management, if you will, converging around a discussion of the many challenges and social ironies wrought in the African experiences of COVID-19. With me and with all of us on this panel, I have Dr. Yvette Esungaja, who is an associate professor of management at the Brimo College of Business and Information Sciences at Tuskegee University, and that's in Alabama. She graduated with a PhD in business administration and international business with a concentration in management and organizational behavior from the University of Texas Pan American in Edinburgh. Now, that university is also known as the University of Texas, Rio Grande. Dr. Esungaja also obtained an MBA in international business and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a major in leadership and management and organizational behavior, both obtained from Rider University in Lawrenceville in New Jersey. She obtained an associate degree from the Academy of Versailles in Paris, France. Dr. Esunga is also an adjunct professor with Madonna University in Michigan. She teaches business administration. She teaches business administration and international business classes, research methods, and MIS. Our next panelist is Dr. Benjamin Hart Fishkin, who is an associate professor of English at Tuskegee University and specializes in teaching 19th century British literature. He holds a PhD from the University of Alabama, where he served as a junior fellow in the Blount Undergraduate Initiative. Prior to earning his doctorate from the University of Alabama in May 2009, he obtained a BA or Bachelor of Arts in English and Film from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and an MA from Miami University in Ohio, where he examined the interest of Charles Dickens in theater and how the stage influenced his novels. Dr. Fishkin has published The Undependable Bonds of Blood, The Unanticipated Problems of Parenthood in the novels of Henry James. Excuse me. He co-edited Outward Evil in Word Battle, Human Memory in Literature with Adaku Ankuma, Bill FD on this panel, and Festus Fule. His publications also include Fears, Doubts, and Joys of Not Belonging, The Repressed, Expressed, and Living Independence, Critical Perspectives on Global Independence with Bill Lee and Adaku Ankuma. Benjamin Hart Fishkin is presently working on the concepts of chaos, upheaval, and tragedy in a comprehensive study of the novels of the Southern Cameroonian author, Emmanuel Frudo. Besides his growing interest in Anglophone Cameroonian, British Southern Cameroon literature, he has recent research interest in the problems of marriage, family, and relationships in the age of globalization. Our third panelist is Dr. Bill F. Ndi. Please pardon my throat. Who is a professor of modern languages, communication, and philosophy at Tuskegee University in Alabama. He earned his dual doctorate from the University of Cergy Pontoise in 2001. He is a poet, playwright, storyteller, literary critic, translator, historian of ideas and mentalities, as well as an academic who has held teaching positions in several universities in Australia, France, and elsewhere. His areas of teaching and research comprise, among others, English languages and literatures, French, professional, technical, and creative writing, world literatures, applied/historical linguistics, literary history, media and communication studies, peace, Quaker studies and conflict resolution, history of internationalism, history of ideas and mentalities, translation and translatology, 17th century and contemporary cultural studies. He has published extensively in these areas. His publications include numerous scholarly works on early Quakerism and translation of early Quaker writings. He has also published poetry and plays in both French and the English languages. Professor Bill F. Lee has 25 published volumes of poetry, of which 6 are in French, a play, and 4 works in translation. He is the co-editor of Outward Evil, Inward Battle, Human Memory and Literature with Adapu Nkrumah, Benjamin Hart Fishkin, and Festus Funde, as well as the co-editor of Fears, Doubts, and Joys of Not Belonging, The Repressed, Expressed, and Living in the Independence, Critical Perspectives on Global Independence with Adapu Nkrumah, and Benjamin Hart Fishkin. His most recent edited work is Secret, Silences, and Betrayals. Also, he has served as a National Endowment for the Humanities scholar. And last but not least is our 4th panelist, Dennis Waspa, who is a 3rd-year PhD student of English Literature at Louisiana State University. He has a Bachelor of Arts in English and Literature from the University of Nairobi, Kenya, and a Master's of Arts in English from Louisiana State University. His research focuses on human movements, eco-criticism, ethnicity, race, and culture in post-colonial Africa and the African diaspora. He taught Swahili here at UNC Chapel Hill in the academic year 2017 and 2018 as a Fulbright visiting scholar. He has presented his research papers in various conferences, including Mardi Gras, ALA, Celsus, Self, and Alta. He's also a poet, and his collection, Haunted City, is currently under review for publication. After introducing our wonderful panel, I would like to go and start with Dr. Esunganjan to just lead us in the starting.
Thank you, Dr. Kamara. I'm going to start sharing my screen, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. It's an honor as well. It's always humbling to be amongst you all because I literally come from another world. I'm in the business world. And yes, when I'm among you guys, I feel so little. So thank you for accepting me. Thank you, Professor Ndi, for bringing me to be in company with all of you. So the title of my presentation this afternoon is The Reason Africans Kept Moving and Thriving Despite a Pandemic. So the pandemic is something that all of us are familiar with. I mean, all of us here in the United States, of course, in the world as well. Our perspective is one that is going to look at the pandemic from the lens of not only what African people have been going through, but what the world thought would happen to people in the African continent. The numbers here, I would like to bring a brief caveat, a caution to please, we're just sticking to the facts. This is not a political presentation. I am a business professor, an international business professor. I believe that we are apolitical in the business world, not saying that politics don't have an impact um, on what we're doing, but seriously, we're just being factual, period. So the COVID-19 pandemic started in China in 2019. It was December. To this date, we have about 119 million 341,245 confirmed cases of COVID. The death toll is about over 2 million and a half to date. Well, of these 119 million plus who got the disease, about 94 million recovered. Here in the US proper, we've had about 29 million cases of COVID to date, and these continue to grow, except at a slower pace than they've been doing before. For the whole of the African continent, we've had about 4 million plus cases of COVID-19. We have to put this in perspective. I'm going to show you more numbers. The numbers are telling, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading all these numbers to you. I would just like for you to look at the US, that is us. We've had about almost 30 million cases of COVID. We are only 4.25% of the world population, but we've had about 25% of cases in the whole world, although we represent only 4.25%. Our death toll is about 21% of the, the deaths that were recorded in the whole world. So that 5 times, if you do the math, 25% death, you divide them by the percentage of our population, we've had 5 times more death than our population in the US. Now, India is a big country, bigger than us, right? And you're going to notice again, China is purposely left out of this equation because we truly want to remain apolitical. Oops, I forgot to time myself. Okay. So India then, about 18% of the world population, only 9% of COVID cases, only 6% of all COVID deaths, right? Now we're going to Cameroon. You can skip Cameroon. They almost got nothing. We're not saying that if even one person dies, that is nothing, but we're keeping all things being equal, right? This is a matter of perspective. In the whole of Africa, we've had about 4 million cases. The whole continent is about 17% of the world population, and we recorded 3% of the COVID cases. 4% of the total death. So in comparison, it wasn't too many individuals, first of all, affected by the pandemic or even who died from the pandemic. This is important because of the reason we're having this discussion in the first place. To show that the continent always lagged, was expected to lag this time again, but is not doing that. For the first time, many first times, it is taking the lead. Why? Well, we're showing that the world could have learned a lot from what Africa was doing during the COVID-19 period. Well, we're getting to this, right? So Africa is never ever able to put its act together. Oh, they're going to be decimated. Oh my goodness, the continent is going to be history. Well, last time we checked, African people are rolling. And again, if you look at the numbers, it's not, we didn't have 25%. Because, in proportion, you look at how people are dying, maybe we didn't have as many deaths in the US as maybe China. But if you look in proportion, we had many individuals who passed away here in the US. And in comparison, you will say we had very few in Africa. So the backdrop of this discussion is that Africa really beat the odds this time around, like it did many times, which really just in the continent defying all expectations, all predictions, right? But when the pandemic started, it here in the US already, it brought about, it exasperated, it highlighted many of the divides in our society. The divide between the haves and the have not, blacks and white. Because if you listen to the news, even as the vaccines is being rolled out, yeah, it's about not as many black people being vaccinated as are the whites who are being vaccinated. Of course, the rich and the poor. We heard on the news how some were trying to make it so that maybe the richer will be able to receive the vaccines, and maybe the poor will not receive the vaccine at the same rate. Of course, between educated and less educated. If you are a first responder, it means you go to work every day. You're more likely to contract the virus, to become sick. And you are the person who is less likely to be protected, to receive the vaccine, to get the protective equipment that you need in order to continue serving the rest of us. Because those of us who are, let's say, this very fortunate to be hiding behind our computers, we didn't have to go out at all, right? So, and those less so. Now, for African people and the rest of the world, huge, huge big gap. Why? Hey, African people really, oh my goodness. No, nothing is going to be left of them, or so they said. Now, if you think about all these comments that were made, right, they are based, research shows us these comments are true. Many observers saying, oh, the COVID is going to be the apocalypse for African people. It is a storm that is coming to them. They won't be able to do anything. Oh my goodness, their healthcare systems, they're going to be saturated. Now, which ones? If you're African or you know anything about Africa at all, do we have any healthcare systems? We don't. So, what was going to be saturated? Not sure. Well, the UN secretary, right, he said millions of people will die on the continent from the COVID. No, to this day, for the whole continent of Africa, we've had about 107,000, no million, not even close to a million. Of course, again, we're not saying that if 107 people die, that's nothing. But compared to the millions of deaths predicted, yeah, it didn't happen. And yes, maybe you've heard this, right? You've heard of stories, reality, again, being factual, of the vaccines being offered to African people. And the question was, yeah, where is the vaccine? We don't have a vaccine in the US. There isn't one in Europe. What is the vaccine? What vaccine are they ready to offer so graciously to African people? They were just being tested. Africans were going to be the guinea pigs. They were going to be tested. What do they have to lose? They were going to die, all of them anyway. What was the basis of all these nice um, ideas and comments? Well, as we know, is if you read the literature, if you watch the news, it's the West opinion on Africa. That also sometimes, I know our friends and brothers and sisters from the African American community in the US, sometimes they've been victim of these types of assumptions as well. And what are these based on? Not reality. They're based on all these ism that we don't even want to discuss here because this goes beyond the scope of this discussion. That African are lesser human beings, that they cannot do much. They're not able to take care of themselves. The reality is African people have proved in history that they're resilient based on our culture, our past, our legacy, our system of belief, and a reality of a people that just continue to survive and thrive against all odds. I want to revisit a couple of these points that I mentioned. African people are resilient, period. History shows this to be true. Reality shows this to be true. African people can be going through the worst, issues, calamities, natural disasters, and what, they will remain in solidarity with each other. They will show compassion towards each other. In my previous life, working for the United Nations, we know of African people, African countries going to the rescue of another African country that is going through something with no structure, um, no structured command to do so, just because a country knows that another country is in need and they will rescue to their help. A history of leadership, right? And our past that has been fought with too many challenges. Don't get me started because this is not the point of this discussion. The legacy of African countries is one of nearly no healthcare system, right? Those that exist are romantic at best, embryonic, if even that, or none whatsoever. But African people learn to take care of their diseases with almost no resources. Of course, what makes us even more resilient is our system of belief, right? If you know Africans a little bit, they pray for everything, right? The sun rises, African people pray. The rain is coming down, African people pray. When someone is sick, African people pray. Someone is not sick, they pray. We have harvest, we pray. We don't, we pray. So, of course, prayer. So during the pandemic, yeah, African people prayed a lot, right? And it's really just that reality of people who, regardless of what is going on, continue to keep on moving on. And in Africa, we didn't have the masks wherever they came from, China, Guatemala, whatnot. Well, guess what? They sold their own masks and they had the most beautiful ones because someone sold one that went along with their personality. Yeah, just that system of I'm going to do something in order to protect me, even if no one else will. So I'm going towards the end of this discussion, right? And saying that African people's survival does not result from chance. And we all know we're social scientists. Chance does nothing to your advantage ever, right? And the reality is that regardless of what others think about African people know best who they are. They know better about themselves than anyone can pretend to tell them. And thus, none of us is forced to accept other individuals' definition of who we are. And yes, the world could learn a couple of things from African people. Because when we talk about African people living in solidarity, whatever it is that went through African people surviving the pandemic had to do with if I had a glass of water before going to bed and I found out going on that when I woke up in the morning, I was feeling less sick. Well, guess what? I told everyone, you know what? If you want to remain free from the pandemic, guess what? Drink a glass of hot water before you go to bed. And then the word was passed on from one person to another. And so then, instead of millions of individuals dying from the pandemic, how many did we have? 107,241 people, showing that, yeah, African people are really not what the world wants them to be. That's a lesson for all of us. Thank you. And this is the end of my presentation. If you have questions,
Wonderful.
but, thank you.
Wonderful, Dr. Sunganjan. I think we'll save the questions until the end of the presentation. So our next presenter is Dr. Benjamin Hart Fishkin.
Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear me all right and see me all right?
Yes,
You can.
yes.
Because normally when I teach an online class, I can see a small image of myself, but I see no such thing. Okay, everybody. Before I start, I think we're blessed to be able to have a meeting like this, although, of course, I think it would be better if we could do it in person. You know, there's some things you just can't do from a distance. And this notion of some things you can't do from a distance really applies to the main character of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm not trying to be too flippant, but the main character in A Nose for Money by Francis Namjo seems to really like women. And I guess that doesn't make him particularly peculiar because lots of men like women, but he pursues them with such a degree of interest. And I'm trying to read something. He pursues them and pursues them with such a fervor, and it's such a special kind of women, okay? Mostly seeking out what Namjo calls medium to low portion Soang prostitutes, okay? We come to the idea of how or why he's spending so much time in this familiar part of town. Okay, he's constantly looking for women, leaving bars on the streets, okay? And not only that, he's going to, I think, very importantly, pay for their, dare I call it, professional services, you know, with counterfeit money, okay? So with this whole COVID situation coming up in the last year or so, I can't help but think that if COVID were a big problem in Africa, and it's certainly a problem everywhere, if he would be adhering to all of these health precautions about social distancing, he would be an awful lot better. After all, you can't make love from a social distance, or at least I don't think you can. Okay. Now, with that kind of a, how shall I put it, attempt for me to whet your appetite a little bit, I have to confess that I feel like one of those, you know, rock and roll type drummers that has drums all around, even behind you, because I have papers in all of those places. And as far as you only have 2 drumsticks, and I don't know which to hit first, okay? But let me try to get across to you this notion of what it is about Francis Namjo, okay? Why it is that we have a character like Prospo, where he comes from, but more importantly, why the African seems to be like this. And even if you extend to the ultimate point, you have to begin to realize that this is not just an African problem, that the kinds of things we're going to see in a novel like this one really extend all over the world, if you look carefully enough for it. A lot of people may purposely avert their eyes. Okay, to begin with, boy, what do I do? By the way, will somebody alert me, if we were in person, someone would alert me about time constrictions and things like that?
Yes, I will.
Oh, you will? Okay, good. So a couple of years, well, more than a couple of years ago, something interesting came up in American politics, and I really think I ought to mention that first to sort of get it out of the way as a foundation. In the early 1960s, I received a magazine article within the last 4 or 5 days via the US mail. It's talking about this. In the early 1960s in the United States, after 8 years of Dwight Eisenhower, there was talk that Barry Goldwater might become the president of the United States, okay? And he sort of locked heads with another Republican named Nelson Rockefeller, okay? And the argument was that a person like Goldwater was all about race, all about division, all about sectionalism. By the way, all things that I think are concerning Africa and the main character Prosper today. And Rockefeller said that embarking on a process of political racism and sectionalism, okay, and division and things of that nature would be, and I'm quoting now, fantastically short-sighted. And if I had to give a second title to this presentation, I think that would be it. Okay, because not only did Goldwater get demolished in 1964 by Lyndon Johnson, but it's the ashes or remnants of that period, probably 56 or 57 years ago, that some might argue may be the origins of what's wrong with America right now, okay, where we have all of this divisive stuff. Well, so much for the trip down American memory lane. These issues of sectionalism and racism have got a lot to do with Africa, because Prosper, once he comes into contact with two counterfeiters, okay, and sees the possibility of obtaining a tremendous amount of money, cash money, he begins to want to change everything. He doesn't want to live in the same place. He doesn't want to dress in the same way. He doesn't want to spend in the same way. He doesn't want to eat in the same way. And as the novel goes on, he adapts habits which I don't think in retrospect are quite good. For starters, he gets married 4 times to women who, for the most part, are interested in him only for money, okay? And not only that, he seems to focus his gaze, like everyone else, not towards the health of his family, not towards a happy situation, not in terms of enjoying his kids and things like that, but his gaze is focused on Paris, going to Paris, visiting Paris. And as we look further on, the notion is the women seem to always want to buy French clothing or clothes made in Paris. They always want to go to Paris. And the big question is, and is this kind of an approach very, very healthy? And I think from retrospect, although I'm not the one tempted here, I think it is very healthy. Unhealthy. Let me see, maybe 4 years ago, I drove to Omaha from Alabama, where I live, to go hear the famous financier and investor Warren Buffett give a speech. And he said, if you're on the wrong road, it doesn't matter how fast you are running, okay? Which, if you think about it, it takes much more of a circumspect way of looking at the world, or a more patient way of looking at the world, instead of what the African, I would argue, has absorbed from the West, which is a more immediate way of looking at the world. I want something, and I want it right now, this second. Okay, I don't want to wait for it. I don't want to plan for it. My radar is about the immediacy, and I guess I can understand it, but that's really not, I would say, a very adult or mature way of looking at the world. One of the authors I read in the last few days said something like this. They said, there's a desire for physical, financial, and material wealth. I've never heard that before. Physical, financial, and material wealth. The meaning is, not only do I want nice things, but I want the kind of nice things that other people can see, okay? Excuse me, may I ask how much time I've got left?
You still have about 10 minutes.
Okay, good. Okay, I want to buy things someone can see. If I pull up to the traffic light in a shiny car, I want the other people around to know that I have a shiny car, and I want them to be able to calculate what that shiny car costs, and the more it costs, the better. Now, of course, that shiny car may be mortgaged to the hilt, but who cares about facts? Okay, so this notion of cars, let's really sort of get to the heavier material right now. The main character wants to buy a particular car. He says thinking about the car was such a pleasurable things to do. Now, I have no problem with people enjoying cars. I really don't, especially if you are mechanically inclined, which I'm certainly not. But if you want to have a car or a few of them, knock yourself out. However, this is what's really important about someone like Prosper. He wants to buy a Peugeot 404, which is a French car, but it doesn't run. Now, the question is, why would anybody want a car that doesn't run? What possible benefit could that be? And in one of Namjo's other texts, that's called Married But Available, he talks about how people, I think mostly women, but not only women, like to have cute, expensive cell phones that are so cute, but so expensive to operate that they carry them around, often keeping them sort of on their lapel, but they never make a call nor receive a call. They want to be seen as having the phone, but they don't want the utility of the phone. And I think if you can see those connections, you're a long, long way towards understanding what's going on here. As far as the Peugeot, which he wants to buy from counterfeiters, the Peugeot that doesn't run, you can see very early on that this is skeptical. Ever since he was told about the car, he had daydreams. He would be a car owner. He had never had one before. If all went according to plan, he would be a car owner, and this would boost his prestige and social position. Boy, that's beyond the quote. That's what he wanted. So this notion of having these desires, I consider it the human psyche surrendering to a dream, okay? Many years ago, I saw a movie set in Los Angeles where a young man, probably in Hollywood, goes up to a woman at a party, and before he gets within 8 feet of her, right, before he can attempt to chat her up, she looks at him and says, "What kind of car do you drive?" Not hello, not how are you, not who are you. And if you can make this connection between Africa or Cameroon and Paris and Los Angeles or Hollywood, I think there's some level of commonality there. He feels the car is going to bring him a sense of belonging. I'll belong to the upper classes, but not to the upper classes in Cameroon, but to the upper classes that are in Paris. He was determined to give his wife, Monique, a well-deserved holiday. The dream of every Mimolander woman is a honeymoon in Paris. At first, you can say, well, this is just a pampered playboy who is a little bit or more than a little bit indulgent. But if you look a bit further, colonialism has absconded and stolen the African sense of self-worth. I think if you go back far enough, the African would not be concerned about a car for those reasons, maybe as one to help your work go better, or maybe one as transportation, but not as a means to impress and make other people feel less superior than you feel about yourself. So a shopping spree that brings with it no value of things that are utilitarian these are the kinds of things that begin to dominate Prosper's mind. He used to drive a beer truck. He doesn't do that anymore. He used to eat sardines out of a can. He doesn't do that anymore. And basically, his spending becomes impractical, inauthentic, hollow, and it attracts women. But as I said before, the kind of women it attracts may be the kind of women that would be best left hidden. So how can a man behave this way? How can a man do this sort of thing? And why does he think this sort of authenticity has a benefit to him? Okay, let me just pause for a second to catch my breath. He finds his first wife in bed with another man, and he behaves as though nothing at all has happened. Is that authentic? He has 3 more wives, but at least 2 of them care about only issues about money. In his search for buying things, to buy a cloth that doesn't fade away, and I would argue just about everything fades away, okay? Everything that dies does not come back. And this is a lesson that he simply never gets a chance to learn. He looks at life as a smorgasbord of things to purchase, okay? I look at him like the Faustus character that Kit Marlowe spoke about so long ago. Further still, in the same tragic fashion, he's so hardwired to think like a consumer that he's never even made aware that he's paying a terrible price that cannot be measured in hard currency. May I ask how much time I've got?
You have 4 minutes.
Okay, I won't even use the 4 minutes.
Mhm.
In Cameroon, lots of people pursue money with feverish intensity to buy things. Okay, I've talked about that before. What I want to finish in is talking about this sort of element of sadness. There's sort of a sad, if you will, almost grubby, petty putridness to the life that the African has, and it always was not that way. Okay, instead, people are focused on foreign newspapers, inherent loneliness, okay? And in reality, Namjo is pulling apart the modern African psyche to reveal a character who wants to bulldoze his way into the membership of a privileged class of people, but in reality, not realizing that he would be far better staying as far away as possible. That quote by Buffett about being on the wrong road, okay, it's not about how quickly you're moving, I would say. It's about how carefully you're moving, okay? And these ideas come from modern globalization. People searching for economic origins instead of cultural ones. The African has surrendered his culture to the West. Namjo likes to call this emptying out instead of having your cup runneth over. There's one quote I want to leave you with if I can find it. Okay. I consider him to be a patient. Dr. Indy on my panel considers all of this a form of gangrene, in quotation marks, a form of corruption. And Namjo just doesn't seem to think correctly, okay? Instead, he doesn't seem to realize the kind of importance things that classical figures like Thomas More once said when he quoted the Bible. In other words, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world, but in the process loses his soul? So not only does he make the wrong decision, I would argue that he misapplies the facts before him and sort of gets blindsided by a situation that really should have been quite clear to him many years before. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fishkin. We'll now have our next panelist. And again, we can save the questions for those who just came. We'll save the questions till the end. Dr. Bill Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you very, very, very much for giving me the opportunity. I would like, let's see, I would like to thank everybody present here to listen to this presentation on politics and COVID pandemic blend, which to me, I consider to be a recipe for committed literature. First of all, you might be wondering, what is committed literature? Committed literature is simple. It is a term or a coinage from Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous French existentialist philosopher who looked into issues of human existence and deciphered the writer's role in society is to be able to expose all that which is wrong in society for the humans in that society to come to terms with their wrongdoings so that they can correct the mistakes. And in this presentation, I am focusing on a book of poem entitled DJT, Directionless Jumping Train. And before I get into discussing directionless jumping train, I would like to start the conversation because we're talking about African mobilities, the means and modalities of movement. Whether it's within or beyond Africa, I would want to draw attention to this pandemic we have experienced or we are experiencing. From its very inception or from the very get-go of that pandemic, we realize it came and politics followed suit and tried to embrace the pandemic, which is a healthcare issue, as not a healthcare issue, but as a political ping pong. But what we would notice is that this moment is a moment that draws attention to scholars of various disciplines to actually analyze, observe, and talk about what is happening from their disciplinary perspective. And writers, most especially committed writers, did not let go of this opportunity. They decided to do what William Wordsworth, in his succinct definition of poetry, says. He defines poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. So, with the COVID, everybody is shaken. Everybody is shaken to the core. That is, there is this spontaneous overflow. There is a powerful feeling because we are shaken. And how does the poet recollect it in perfect tranquility? So before I even get into discussing DJT, I would like to draw attention to two romantic poets, P.B. Shelley and John Keats. And I'm drawing this attention, you would see the connection of me drawing attention to their works. P.B. Shelley writes in Ozymandias a poem that depicts an encounter with a traveler, and the traveler talking about something that happened in the past and what could be observed in the present. And what is peculiar about Shelley's poem is the celebration of the power of art. And when I talk of the celebration of the power of art, you would see DJT celebrate the power of art through the blend of the COVID pandemic and politics. We will get to that in a minute. In this poem, you would see the highlights in purple. Shelley says, tell that its sculptor well those passions read, meaning the sculptor, who is the artist, who carved out the image of the ruler described in the poem, read the passions on his face very well. Now the sculpture is in shambles, but guess what? The art which yet survived, that is only the art survived. And with the art surviving, it means the poets go a long way to tell or to document history in their own way, a point I will come back to. And when we look at John Keats' poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, I just extracted the very last stanza of the poem, and which contains one of the quotes Keats is famously known for, which is still a celebration of art, in which he says, when old age shall these generations waste, thou shalt remain, meaning art shall remain, in the midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest, meaning art is a friend to man. And art is what tells human beings that beauty is truth, truth, beauty. And that is all everybody on earth needs to know. Okay? That's all we know on earth and all we need to know. Now, saying that, I embarked on a critical reading of Directionless Jumping Train. And this critical reading led to the understanding that the speaker of the poem conceives the blend of politics and pandemic to be a kind of miscarried marriage, which is just a replication of the title DJT. We'll talk about the title in a minute, which has another meaning to it beyond the directionless jumping train. It also shows that the poet in his recollection came to the understanding that blending a healthcare concern and politics is a toxic kind of blend of both politics and misinformation. And with that kind of toxic blend, the poet is not left indifferent. The poet is committed to his poetry. But the commitment to poetry comes with the idea of the poem serving a purpose to humanity. That is the restorative power of art. In Dr. Esunge's presentation, somebody might say maybe we did prepare this presentation together or so, but I found it interesting that she drew attention to the resilience of the African, drew attention to the success of the African in the face of adversity, the compassion of the African, the humanist hope. And all of this makes for the reading of DJT, a historical documentation of a special kind. It makes of it a reading, we would be reading at it as a historical documentation of a special kind. Now, to my listeners, you might want to ask, you've listed all of these things, how did you come by it? The thing is, in trying to analyze the poem, I asked just 3 questions. There were multiple questions to be asked, but I limited the questions to 3 for the purposes of this presentation. I asked, what happens when a politician willfully transforms a public health concern into a political ping pong? Does the poet or the speaker in a poem, especially DJT, shy away from recording history creatively, as we have mentioned above, as did the Romantics? Or again, does the poet turn a blind eye to the political rigmarole, as does some of the passengers in the directionless jumping train? And the passengers in the directionless jumping train, I will draw attention to, are the political lackeys, congressmen, senators who buy into a conspiracy that has nothing to do with the public health crisis. Now, having said that, I looked at the structure of the poem. And you would be surprised. The title, DJT, is also an abbreviation for a former US president. And that it is directionless jumping train. Whether we like politics or not, I would defer, right, to Socrates, who defines human being as homos politicus. We are a political being, so we cannot dissociate ourselves and everything we do from politics. So I mentioned that clearly. Next, the poem is just made up of 1 sentence. That sentence could be looked at grammatically, and it could be looked at legally. From the legal standpoint, when you sentence someone, you condemn them. And 1 sentence says it all. Next, the poem has 1450 lines, which in my reading of the poem seem to indicate or to cage the idea of one. For once upon a time, 4-5, there was a 4-5. And what did the 4-5 amount to in the face of the challenging pandemic? He amounted to 0. So, in short, DJT, directionless jumping train, takes the reader on a voyage or a journey through the COVID-19 jungle, whose landscape is really rendered rough. The terrain is rough as a result of politicization and politicians' refusal to allow experts in the field to curb the various roadblocks and challenges imposed by the COVID itself. DJT also explores political bad-mouthing of opponents and also exposes the cronies as turning a blind eye to the leader's failings. So, if you look at the poem from start to finish, what you would see is that the poet, through a careful, allusive poetic composition process, takes on or challenges the aberrant oppression that a mad, egocentric individual at the at the helm of a train forces upon his passengers. And this is not without complicity of these passengers. The passengers themselves, while boarding his train, are fully aware that the train is a train of doom. So the poem comes across as a kind of reconstruction of the wrong turn in world politics from the wreckage and random distemper of just one particular ruler, okay, who does not even understand politics and does not even have the political wit to understand the functioning of democracy. So this poem becomes a memorialization of chaos that contemporizes America. I mean the United States of America. And this is in a bid to show to the oppressed, right? To show to the oppressed that they can arm themselves with memory. Can I know how many minutes I have left? Sorry. Unmute yourself, please. I can't hear you, Dr. Kamara.
You have 3 minutes left.
3 minutes left. All right. I'm not going to spend time reading all what I had planned to, but I wanted to read a little bit of the poem. This is the opening of the poem, which reads, cynical to service, uncouth to heroism, and a knave to greenbacks, and as both heroism and service, with no fiscal tilt, is but a delight to suckers and losers, living pen man after pen man, pen woman after pen woman, pen girl after pen girl, pen boy after pen boy, penning and penning all about his jumping train, with no bearing at breakneck speed, headed for a gigantic wreck, out of which we wish none go. To seek a shattered black body, cause in this world he vied to save the day. He was spited and ridiculed, the best thought of him nothing but fun, out of which to carve out a one-term leaseholder who denied to be and was replaced by a lousy machinist. Okay, now the attitude, the poet's attitude. The poet takes delight in deriding political interference in areas politics should not meddle. The poet also shows his disgust with the political class and its blindness to the misery the pandemic has provoked to the people. This DJT comes across as a poetic castigation of the political class in any part of this world willing to leave the masses in a perpetual tailspin. So I would like to draw my conversation to an end by pointing out that we shouldn't be surprised at the poet's stance in a situation of crisis like this, because this is what happens when a nation, as it is often the case in many an African nation, is entrusted in the hands of a narcissist. Nonetheless, as somebody who stands with the oppressed, the poet points out, as D.H. Lawrence mentions in the quote I'm going to read extantly, that we cannot just surrender to narcissists. D.H. Lawrence tells us ours is essentially a tragic age. Nobody would dispute the fact that the COVID pandemic has left us with tragedy unforetold. But guess what? We, the oppressed worldwide, as Africans, we refuse to take it tragically. We know the cataclysm has happened. COVID has already devastated what it is devastated. We who've left behind, we are amongst the ruins because nobody is left unaffected by COVID. But there is one thing we have to understand. We need to start to build up new little habitats. And we must have new little hopes. And knowing that we have to rebuild, we have to understand it is hard work and that there is no smooth road into the future. But like Dr. Isunga said in her presentation, we need to go around. We must scramble over the obstacles, tell our neighbors what we found that is working, because we have to live no matter how many skies have fallen on us. I thank you guys for your attention. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Billy. Now we'll hand it over to our fourth presenter, Dennis Waswa.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamara. And our first three panelists who have kind of like provided some interesting background to my presentation on reconstruction of Black humanism, the becoming Black of the world. So in my presentation, one thing that I'm interested with, just the other three presenters have already highlighted, is what does it mean to be Black, and more so, what does it mean to be an African in the global world? So I'm interested in the question of movement of Black people and people of African descent in Euro-America, and in the becoming part or not part of this Euro-American world. And as a way of beginning my presentation, I want to quote George Sefardey, who is a professor at Ontario Institute in Canada, who teaches Black studies. And in his work, Black Like Me, Reframing Blackness for Decolonial Politics, he argues that Blackness today has become a means, a sense of being out of place and not belonging, given that Black people and people of African descent are continually asked to validate or legitimize their existence. I would like to kind of like provide some background to my argument before I state it. And my paper is kind of like operating in the intermediary space between two works, and that is Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason and Achille Mbembe's critique of black reason. And in the critique of pure reason, Achille Mbembe, not Achille Mbembe, but Immanuel Kant classifies Western epistemologies about the human and the world as the sovereignty of reason, and establishes westernized rationalities as the pure, untainted positions of human reason. So to keep this status of a westernized rationality as pure and untainted, Kant's model of rationality excludes blackness and black bodies from attaining and accessing this pure reason. So while reducing black people to the status of unreasoning, Kant engages in what I refer to as a familiar Western ontology that often erases and dehumanizes black bodies from being. So this colonial anti-black rhetoric, according to me, is what classifies or what grounds modernity, liberalism, and globalization that systematically reduces blackness and black bodies as lives that are commodified, or to put it in other words, lives that are in ruins. So the Kantian model then renders blackness to a category that is exterior to the human of the world. And by denying blackness this access to becoming human of the world, Kant's metaphysics then stripes off blackness from its individuality. So after providing this context for my paper, I would like to emphasize that this presentation examines and questions historical and contemporary Western ontologies that continues to unleash neoliberal epistemologies that dismember blackness and black people from the category of the human. So I'm interested in two questions in this presentation. One, who and what makes up the category of the human? And then two, why is in the black body considered human like others in Western epistemes, as I have highlighted in Kant? So I argue that there is a need today to rehabilitate blackness and black people from this violent Western, or if I were to call it in other words, Euro-American ontology, which is established on the colonial history of brutalism and consumerism. For me, I think until such liberation of disengaging and dismembering blackness from this Western ontology occurs, then black humanism that is free from this violence is a thing that will remain elusive. So I would like to quote Mbembe in Critique of Pure Reason, and for him he posits that black was from the beginning a mechanism for objectification and degradation. He explains that there has always been an intimate relationship between the name black or Africa and death, murder, being buried alive, along with the silence to which the thing necessary had to be reduced, and that is the black or the African thing. So Western epistemologies of blackness strangle all life from the category of black and leaves it as a lifeless object that is then commodified for market value. And as a result of that, my interest in this paper was then to attempt to create a new authentic blackness, or a new authentic identity of blackness that is beyond the imaginations and fantasies of people like Kant, as I've mentioned before. So this is a kind of like a project that is could be considered to be a radical tradition of resistance and self-fashioning that seeks to undermine the destruction and exclusion of black subjects from being human by hegemonic Western ontology. So to address those two questions that I mentioned above and kind of like remain faithful to the subject of my paper, I will make two propositions. And the first one is that throughout history, but especially today, I think black humanism has always been an identity that is under reconstruction. And what I mean here is that blackness and Africanness as an identity for so long has always been an illusionary label that is given to black people and people of African descent by a Western rationality. Yet, this illusionary label from the Western metaphysics is what is presented to the world as the familiar form of blackness or Africanness, that which is violent, that which is irrational, that which is poor, and that which is surplus. In other words, these are bodies that the West have often considered to count for nothing, bodies that have often been considered to be in excess, and therefore they can be laid off at any time. So westernized blackness for me has altered the real perception of being black and assigned certain expectations to the thing black. And in a study titled Repairing Worlds on Radical Openness Beyond Fugitivity and Politics of Care, Vanessa Thompson reasons that in the Western Archive, blackness is not really understood as an ontology, but rather as a historical and shifting production and rationalization of the black or the African as a thing. So here, black people are therefore made to live in the shadows of this particular illusionary label as they continue to navigate the assigned dehumanized identity. Therefore, there's a way in which we see Western reason surviving to date on a rhetoric of difference. And by ascertaining this exclusivity, this difference to blackness, then Western rationality like Kant's and Thompson's constructs blackness as that which is outside the global human being, that which is outside the pure reason of the West, for that matter. So the black man here exists only based on a rationality that constructs him as the fiction of the other, and the Western models of reason and being creates hierarchies within the category of the human, and by creating these hierarchies or by creating these exclusions, then the white category is often presented as the superior to the black category. And as a result of that, it leaves the black category often in constant struggle to regain its humanness. Therefore, for me, I think the present contemporary ontologies around this question of blackness and Africanness begs for a need to dismember, or other words, disengage the black subject from this Western rhetoric that maps for itself a new form of reason and self-recognition. Perhaps I think it is only logical for me to posit that blackness is an identity that is presently in the process of becoming. I think it's still an identity awaiting to arrive in the new world, and that is the world where it is treated and considered as part of the human category in its complete form. Although it's still trapped in the tensions of Western metaphysics and reason, I believe it's that the black authentic identity is underway, and if the ongoing geopolitical and global protests that we have witnessed in the recent past is anything to go by, and the calls for a universal right to breathe for the black subject and the African subject, then my proposition becomes somehow logical. And then the second proposition that I want to make is that blackness in itself and Africanness is an identity whose history and humanization can be categorized in three stages. And the first stage, as my other panelists have already presented on, is colonialism, and the second one is enslavement or slavery, and the third one is global capitalism. And one thing that you can note within these three stages, within colonialism, within slavery or enslavement, and global capitalism, the thing that binds them together is that they all veil black humanism and objectifies blackness to a thing that can only be traded for market value. I want to give some comments on colonialism, and I would like to agree with David Marriott, who explains that blackness is a European idea of a world that is instituted through multiple imaginings of being apart, beyond the horizon, and located at the remote edge of human category. So through Marriott's sentiments here, we see Euro-America as the embrace of colonialism, seeking to push blackness to the periphery of the human category, especially during its encounters or prior encounters with Africa in the early 1900s as a form of colonization. So blackness became a category at that time that is only inferior to Western reason. So there's a way through colonialism, the West purports to be the original inhabitants of the world, and Africans or black people then have only to be at the mercies of the West as they kind of like claim their fair share of the globe. So historically, Western reason often views blackness as a category that is lacking in reason and validity. And blackness here is linked to a discourse of difference, which judges and considers it as not only inferior, but lacking a legitimacy to be part of the human category. So although blackness is a product of a historical development of colonialism, for me, I think blackness goes beyond the question of history and includes a critique of judgment such as Kant's, especially in the present Western world, and quoting Pan-African legacies and Afropolitan futures. Sarah Palakrishan acknowledges that Western reason in its colonizing character perceives blackness and black people as insignificant to the history of the human world. Such Western rationalities, as well as Kant's, as I've already mentioned, places black people out of history and denies them a belonging to the world. So colonialism establishes Euro-America as the center of gravity, as the central or the centrality of pure reason, the center of modernity and capitalism. So in this all mix, black people are then excluded from being real agents of the world, and they are placed only at the periphery of humanity. I don't have much time remaining. I think
1 minute, by the way, please quickly.
And as a form of just I won't have time to mention of slavery and global capitalism and how it has kind of like descended blackness or black people from becoming part of the human category. But in my conclusion, I would like to state that the current moment is a moment of struggle for blackness in becoming part of the human and the global order, not as a commodity to be traded and exchanged for profits, but as a participant in the making of the human world. In this present moment of becoming, I envision a possibility of black people reconnecting to the global homeland through activism, as Professor T had mentioned, creativity, innovation, and artistry. So by creating global communities, blackness will then be able to share in the oneness of the human identity. So this also in view with people like Fanon, in view of the 2018 Black Panther movie. And lastly, I think we as black scholars should continue questioning and resisting the exclusions of blackness and Africans from the global social, cultural, and economic paradigms, or in its usage therein as a mechanism for global capitalism. I think black scholars should continue engaging in this radical tradition that demands a basic human desire for visibility, recognition, and respect for black people's humanity in the Western world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis Waswa, for this great presentation. Thank you also for all our panelists.
So we still have about 9 minutes. We are allowed to go up to 3:20. So I'll open up for questions if there's any in the audience.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Ken.
Ken Wilburn here. I have two questions, one for Bill and one for Dennis. I'd like to ask Dennis this question first. The topic of your paper is so important. Just the whole movement over time, centuries. Another way to look at it is even further back, and that is all of us having come from the mother continent. People that look like me, that don't look like you in terms of skin color, for a very, very long time. As that science was revealed with genetics, with DNA. I mean, there was already evidence before that, but certainly with DNA, that closed the story on both men and women in the 80s. We know that we are all global Africans. So my question is, with that kind of identity that I have on me, that I have had since the 80s, a long time, but of course, as I walk down the street, no one would even know that that's how I think, because when they look at me, it's another white boy walking down the street, that kind of thing. I mean, I know how, well, I'm not unique, far from it, but there are not very many of me in the big scheme of people who look like me. So as that growing awareness expands, and I think it will, I'm hopeful, I think it will. Science, what Bill was talking about, truth. Where is the global African in the conversation of Black humanism that you talked about? I would suggest we're in the same family, but I would like to get your views on that.
Can I go? Or I wait?
I think you can go ahead, Dennis. Yeah.
I would like to, I don't know how much, Ken, you've read on Afropolitanism. And we have had new movements coming out, and Afropolitanism is a term that was coined by Haile Selassie. I think it was in 2015. And she points out that for her, everybody who comes from the African continent is an Afropolitan, and that means they are kind of like Africans of the world. If you go, for example, within the continent, we have people who have been moving all around from one region of the country to another, from one country to another, from Africa to the West. And there's a way in which we see that Africans in themselves, they have been global citizens for a very long time, right? If we also think about slavery, that's also, although in a negative form, slavery as an institution itself made Africans global citizens. And so my attempt in this paper was trying to query, why is it that despite the fact that Africans have been global citizens for a very long time, we still have such Western epistemologies like Kant's that did not consider Africans to be part of the world. And I was trying to push for this, against this form of metaphysics that considers that blackness or black people or African people are not part of the global world, right? They have been excluded from it. And historically, that is true. People from Africa, people of African descent of black, if we were to think about the violence that goes on in America against such identities, then it's a violence that tries to exclude them from becoming human of the world, right? And so I'm trying to ask ourselves, how is it that we can reconsider Black humanism or Africanness to be part of this global world order? And I didn't read a comment I had in my conclusion, which is the fact that I think today the ongoing campaigns, we have Black Lives Matter movement and so many other campaigns going on. And I think this is a moment that these movements are trying to recenter Blackness or Africanness within the global human category that is beyond the Western framed representations of Blackness as exclusionary as they have been before.
Great.
Thank you. It's, Africans have so much to teach the rest of the world. They would only open their ears. Bill.
Yes. Thank you.
Have you seen the film and the series Snowpiercer?
No.
Oh, your poem, and has anyone here seen that by any chance? Well, very quickly, it is the world has come to an end due to an environmental disaster, and the only people left alive are on a train.
Yeah.
And the train circumnavigates the world, and it goes on for maybe 15 to 20 years. And inside the train, which has 1,000 cars, the world is more or less recreated in all of its frailties and all of its disparities. And it's run by someone you could call the equivalent of Donald Trump, never really meeting, but just because there are other people who represent him. He evidently, you don't find out until much later, that he dies pretty early on. But the chaos and the injustices that he sets in motion are part of the story. And just one more point. In the series, the people who kind of grab onto the train at the end, they have to live in the very back of it, and they suffer a great deal. And there have been several revolutions over those 15 years from that. And the film or the series pretty much picks up toward the end of the story when there is an African. It was an African American, actually, although he takes on African dress to some extent, and leads the new revolution to create a world order. And there are lots of themes in there that are similar to your poem. It was very striking to me.
Thank you.
No chaser.
Thank you. And could you repeat the title of the series again for me to take, or just text it to me on a chat?
It might be Snowpiercer rather than Snow Chaser. I think it's Snowpiercer.
Okay.
And I believe it's on Netflix, but there's also a movie that came out maybe 10 years ago of the same name on which the series is based.
Okay, thank you.
Good. I think there's a comment in the chat box that says Dr. Fishkin's characterization of Africans and the conspicuous consumption habits that desire Western goods and lifestyle is that a real authentic representation of all Africans, or only a few elites? So that's a question.
Okay, I don't think that's by any means everybody's taste, but I think probably, according to a novelist like Namjo, people of a certain age more so might tend to be that way. The delineation is that people who are above a certain age don't particularly like the changes that have come about as a result of colonialism. So no, I don't think the habits are everyone, okay? And as far as the few elites are concerned, everybody seems to want to join that club or make their borders or boundaries elastic, but it's sort of presented as a mirage or a false way to go about business.
Very good. I think one comment that I just wanted to throw in is, there's, I think, Dr. Esunga wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yes,
We'll
if
give
I
you
may,
the priority.
I just had a comment regarding that characterization of Dr. Fishkin's author. I think that's just what it is. It is the characterization. It doesn't mean that it is reality. Now, if you look from, I'm a business, right, person, international business person. So of course I don't look at things with the same lens that you guys have. If you look at the world right now, no one only consumes American, right? In fact, we don't consume American at all. I don't want to talk about what we consume, period. But the notion that African people only want to consume Western or American is just that, a notion. It's not the reality.
Okay, that is the notion that's presented in the novel. I don't think anybody could read it and come to another conclusion. However, he does more than present the notion, he undercuts it. But I think the criticism is that there are plenty of people who are smarter to sidestep this. Is that correct?
Were you asking me a question?
No, well, anybody who wants to answer.
All right. Let me chip in really quickly there. Addressing that question, whether it is real, authentic representation of all Africans. One of the things we might talk regarding an author like Nyanjo is that this is an author who picks on all the wrongs in the society, giving that image to the society with the goal that with the society realizing what the society is doing wrong, the society can change, okay? And it is telling them that you who think and believe that everything of yours should come from Paris, or you should go live a lifestyle that is so foreign to you, that is not the way to go. He actually uses that as a trope for change, to adopt the authentic African way rather than adopting a strenuous, like Dennis was talking about the epistemology, all right? We cannot rely on exogenous epistemologies. We should think about the endogenous ones, those that come from within. And that is where the question Ben Fishkin asked at the beginning of is this thing, what is the point buying a car that does not move? You are getting something that takes you nowhere. Why not rely on something that will take you somewhere? Your culture, your system, your value system, your belief system, they can take you somewhere, but something that is from somewhere it might not work for you. It is just like we all drive cars. What is a car to somebody who desires owning a car and doesn't know how to drive? It serves no purpose. We want to drink the top champagne from Paris, but we don't know how to grow grapes. So I think this is what Nyanjo targets in his novels. And when we are analyzing, we should be conscious of the fact that he is actually taking on a class of people who believe that by living a foreign lifestyle, they are doing good for their people. I can take the example of the Cameroonian leader, and borrowing even from Dr. Fishkin in one of his conference presentations, where he talked of the president spending more time in Switzerland than in his country, and spending on a weekly basis about $50,000 in a Swiss hotel when people are dying in the hospitals in his country without having a tablet of aspirin as much as to relieve them of headache. So if this is the practice, I think we come back to that kind of characterization, which calls for all of us, academics and intellectuals, to chastise. Thank you.
Awesome. That's a very powerful response. I wonder, if Dr. Yvette Esunga wanted to say something about Dennis's question, would you like to share with all of us? And then we will close from there.
Well,
I wanted
you.
to add on before she answers.
Go ahead, please, Dennis, quickly.
Dennis raised a good question about the validity of some of the data that we are quoting is from Africa. And I come from Kenya, and we have this thing called East African Community, and we know the politics that goes on within the region. And we are very certain that in Tanzania, right from the word go, they did not accept the issue of COVID. And they rejected the whole notion of, even the practices of closing borders and, testing and doing all that. I think they have only accepted a week or so ago when one of the vice presidents died, a couple of ministers died, and even as we speak, I think the president is in India because of COVID. So I think we also need to be cautious about the accuracy of the data. What is your take, Dr. Isonga?
Okay.
So because I'm a number person, that's all we do in business. We have to take numbers with, a grain of salt always. So we want to talk about misinformation. Let's start right here, right? We could go miles. So all things being equal, of course they never are, but all things being equal, we are not near the numbers of fatalities or COVID-19 cases that the world predicted for us, right?
Mhm.
So everyone else had it worse than we did, period. Now, are we cooking numbers like many do or like everyone does? Of course we do. Are we going to talk about our numbers here? No. Are we going to talk about the numbers in China? No. Are we going to talk about anyone else's numbers? No. But we are saying, all things being kept equal, Africa did not come as bad off as it was predicted it would. Well, if you talk to any one of us, although we're here, we also have families in Africa, in Europe, and everywhere in the world. Everyone said the African continent was going to disappear because of the COVID. That is not what is happening. In fact, we are disappearing in the US because of the COVID, right? So that's all I'm saying. That's why I said there is a caveat that it doesn't mean that we didn't get sick. We did. We just did not get as sick as it was predicted that we would. Because in fact, we didn't compared to always in comparison to. We didn't. And yes, the United Nations at some point, they had to admit, oh my goodness, what is happening with the African continent? We thought they will all die. What is happening here? Because the UN secretary said so, that we will die. Did he consult with, somebody in the higher realms and who told him, oh yeah, all African people are going to die? They did not. We did. We are.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Yvette Sunganja and Dennis Waswa, Dr. Bill Lee, and Dr. Benjamin Fishkin. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. I'm sure we have more to share, but we are constrained by time, so we'll have to stop here. You have a wonderful rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.